Uh,
This
all right. I'm making sure. All right. All right. Now I know. Hello there, everyone. This is Mr. Brass, and with me is Kerri from Carnivore is Vegan. And yeah, I've had her on before on my other show, and I thought it'd be great to get her back on to talk about, the environment and how things have been going since the last time we talked. Tell everyone how you're doing, Kerri.
I am doing pretty well. We have been very, very busy working on our farm. It's middle of planting season and just animals out our ears and working our little butts off 6, 8 hours a day in the hot sun. Whew, lot going on.
Yeah. Um, how how is the little pigs going?
The little pigs are going great. They're not so little anymore. We're expecting some little tiny ones any day now, but otherwise, most of them are pretty big now.
Mhm.
So, not so many little ones anymore.
I forget. Are pigs like very parental? Like, are they like maternalistic and paternalistic?
Definitely not paternalistic. They are just, they do their deed. The boars do their deed, and then they walk away and they have nothing to do with the babies, and they might even kill them and eat them. But the moms are pretty good generally for a while, and then they'll feed them and take care of them for the first couple of months. And then when they get bored, they'll just kick them off and want nothing else to do with them. But they live as kind of family groups anyway. So I don't know that I'd say they're maternalistic after that, but they do live, in clans. They're prey animals, so they like to live close together and they cuddle together all day and lay in wallows all day together, and they like being around other pigs. It's a
So it's
safe
like a so it's
environment for them.
a little commune.
Yeah, they like to live communally and live in herds. Most prey animals do, just because it's safety in numbers. Whether they actually like each other or not, I don't know, but they seem to. They hang out together and
I know.
sleep
I
sleep
know cows.
together.
Yeah, I know cows are like that too.
Yeah,
Where
they're
where I know bulls don't really have much to do with the kids, but I know um cows can be sort of hit and miss when it comes to children, depending on the breed.
Yeah, generally beef cows are pretty good maternalistic, have a pretty good maternal instinct, but dairy cows are terrible and they'll just kill their babies. Um,
Mm,
but beef cows generally are pretty good. We have beef cows, and
mm.
they're pretty fun to watch because they'll even one of the mama cows will take all the babies and kind of babysit while everybody else goes off and does their thing and goes and grazes, and they'll just take care of them and keep an eye on them, and it's kind of fun to watch. I think they have a pretty good maternal instinct, but zero paternal instinct. So the bulls have absolutely nothing to do with the babies whatsoever.
Doesn't really sound that different than from what we already hear.
Farming's fun. You get to learn a lot.
Yeah. Um, but I had actually I had found you out through researching the carnivore diet. I remember, I can't remember his last name, but I know he's a doctor, Dr. Sean
Baker.
Baker. Yeah, Dr. Sean Baker. And I heard about the carnivore diet from him, and I looked up anti-vegan stuff and the carnivore diet, and eventually I just came across you.
Sounds natural to come across me in anti-vegan arguments and carnivore diet. So
Yeah. So, for the audience that may not have heard our last discussion, can you tell them how you got into the carnivore diet?
I honestly don't remember specifically. It just came kind of over time, I guess. Um, I had actually lived in Uruguay for a while, and they have no good food except for red meat and wine. They have great grass fed beef. And I was probably so close to being on the carnivore diet. Um, and then spent a couple more years, not in Uruguay, and ran across, I think it was probably ran across a talk by Jordan Peterson, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. And I think my husband mentioned it a couple of times, like, you have to check out this talk, this podcast about Jordan Peterson and the carnivore diet. And it just went from there. Sometimes things have to hit me a few times before I really pay attention to it. So I think I'd heard about it quite a few times before I really, like, it landed on me. And then once it did, it's like, holy crap, I was almost doing that. If I'd have just cut out, these few things that I was eating while I was in Uruguay, I would have already been on the carnivore diet. So it was just easy and natural to kind of go that direction.
Yeah, I remember that, like, I remember a common argument that you would always make against vegans is just how, like, rare it is for veganism in the wild, like for humans, and how there's not like a single long-term scientific study over lifetime vegans.
Right. So let's see. So what should I address there first? Yeah, especially the long-term diets of vegans. So there's zero studies on any long-term, let's say lifelong vegan. So if you look through all the entire literature in history of, biology or archaeology, paleontology, there is not a single study even mentioning a lifelong vegan. No culture, no individual that I'm aware of has ever been vegan for their entire life, especially, birth to death, except for lots and lots of dead children in the vegan diet. So I guess we could call that birth to death, but I don't think that would be what they're really wanting to hear. But yeah, there's no lifelong vegan healthy adult in any piece of scientific literature anywhere, and no vegan cultures anywhere in any scientific literature.
But don't you know about Jainism?
That's always seems to be the argument, but Jains have historically always eaten dairy, and they almost worship dairy. They if you look up Jain dairies, they even keep dairies around the world that are ahimsa. So the idea of dairy in Jainism is a little different than the West, where they tend to they want the animals to be taken care of ethically, and so they buy from dairies that treat the animals ethically, and you can find ahimsa dairies that are run by Jains, and Jains have historically always eaten dairy. In fact, it's a big contention within the Jain community itself that they eat dairy, and some have obviously gone vegan, but we don't have any, as far as I know, we don't have any literature on any long-term or lifelong vegans in the Jain community as far as their health is concerned.
Well, yeah, and I also believe with Jains, it also falls into a sort of Buddhist category where, at least in Buddhism, there isn't really a prescription on being a vegan in Buddhism. What there more or less is there is, like, you're not supposed to do harm to animals, but you're perfectly allowed to say pick up if you go into a forest and you see a dead animal, yeah, and it's a clean kill, you're allowed to take that home and eat it. Or in the case of charity, if someone is offering you meat, you're supposed to take it anyway for charity. So they do make exceptions. It's all about them personally not being the ones that do the killing.
Right. Yeah. In the Buddhist tradition, even the Buddha ate meat, and that was one of the prescriptions in Buddhism, the original Buddhism from the Buddha's mouth, directly from the Buddha, was that if offered meat and you're you're doing alms. One of the main tenets of Buddhism early on was that all the monks and nuns, monks is a general term for monks and nuns, they would go around and get all of their nutrition by the grace of God, by charity. And so if someone gave you meat to eat, it would be very rude to say, oh no, I can't have these foods and these foods and these foods. And you were just expected to eat what was given to you. And there's some funny stories about that, where people were given awful things to eat and expected to eat it. And that was part of them becoming enlightened, was seeing that they had this in them, that they didn't like these certain foods, that they were having preferences, and so they gave them awful, horrible, terrible things to eat and expected them to eat it. And when they didn't, they showed them how they were not enlightened in that moment. And there's some interesting Buddhist stories. I've been in the Buddhist community a little bit, so I'm a little bit aware of some of the stories and traditions in Buddhism, but I wouldn't call myself a Buddhist. So if I'm wrong on any of these points, I would stand to be corrected.
Well, I know, like, we don't actually have anything so much straight from the Buddhist's mouth. We have recordings of his sayings that were passed down generation by generation, and that were eventually written down. Like, I believe the earliest biography we have of the Buddha himself was, like, I don't know, like 400 or 500 years after his death.
I'm not super sure about that, but I know that at least my understanding is that he was they were aware, there were a lot of people that were aware that he was an enlightened person, and that he was a historical person, that he was going to be a famous person, or that he was a historical person in life. And there were actual scribes that went around taking down all of his accounts that he stated. And many times they would ask questions like, well, you said this before and now you're saying this, and that's a contradiction. Can you explain? So from my understanding, and again, I'm maybe wrong, I'm not entirely 100% sure on this, that that his words were actually written down by many people in his lifetime.
I remember, like, it's funny, a lot of people, we like, in the Western culture, we have such a high value on writing things, but in many cultures, they just never had that.
Right.
And in fact, in some ancient Greek cultures, it was actually considered disrespectful to write it down, because they seen stuff down as being a lazy way of remembering things.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, like, in some cultures, they considered writing things down to be, like, they preferred memorizing everything, and they considered writing to be just lazy.
That certainly makes sense, that if you write it down, we write it down because we can't remember it very often. So if you have to remember it, that's it's hard. It's very hard to keep long, large amounts of information in your brain over a period of time, especially specific things.
Well, yeah,
But oral traditions are powerful.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think also I also think that's sort of that was sort of a rationalization that came about by the fact that writing things down was expensive. You had to have parchment, and what people don't remember is that they didn't invent, you know, places where you could actually put the paper down on, like a desk. So often scribes and stuff would have to put the paper over their legs and use that.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, parchment or other forms of what we call paper today wouldn't have existed quite as much. I think there were paper and paper trees, and like bark on trees, but most everything else would have been very expensive.
Yeah, so it was very expensive. So it's also a way of justifying the fact that there was just such a high economic cost for it. And so, and people just generally, I think there was not as much necessary. It wasn't much needed, because if you live in a big communal, if you live in a communal society, like, all have to, you're really all remembering like just similar stories. And if you forget a detail, well, your friend was there as well, and he can patch you up on it. Nowadays, like, whenever we live so far apart from each other, that doesn't really work as well.
Yeah, and they would have told stories around the campfire, and everyone would have heard the same stories probably over and over and over again as well. And I think they did a lot of stories in song as well.
Well, yeah, because that's easier to remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's a lot of what they very much valued memorizing, even some more than we do now. And so I believe they would say is that many students back then, like in ancient Greek times, would memorize like entire large sections of the Iliad,
Mm.
and they'd be able to recite it by heart.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, we definitely have lost some brain power there, and some of that, they even hypothesize that things like that is one of the reasons why we've lost some of our excuse me, I'm not sure what's going on with my throat. That we've lost some of our brain capacity over time, or at least brain size. They know that we've lost brain cavity size, and possibly they don't know for sure if we've lost brain power as well. And that could be part of the reason, is that we ended up getting written language, and that we
Well,
didn't have to memorize, we didn't have to memorize gigantic, large amounts of information at any one time.
that would also explain veganism.
There supposedly is a study out there showing that vegans have smaller brains, but I've never actually been able to find that study.
Mhm. Yeah. So a common thing that I know vegans actually go for is they go for the environmental harms that apparently that eating meat does, like cow farts in the
Right,
ozone layer.
right.
Um, what information can you give on that sort of thing?
Well, there's interesting rebuttals to that, and I have to think of his name at the moment. One of the top top methane researchers in the world is right here in California, UC Davis. Hold on, I'm looking up his name. It's not coming to me off the top of my head. Frank Mitloehner, and he's spent his entire career basically rebutting this information that cow farts or cow burps actually are destroying the world. Basically, they just don't do a full accounting of it. So imagine the way that they count methane is they count it as emissions from cows, but what they don't do is take intakes into account. So they're only accounting for output. Yet we know cows eat grass, and grass is carbonaceous. Methane is carbonaceous. You have to account for the intake in methane, and not just the output of methane. And if you think about this, it's just common sense. Let's do the same thing with cow pee. If you looked at a cow and watched it peeing, if you were a vegan, you might conclude that cow pee is going to flood the world eventually, because they wouldn't account for the intake in water from grass and water. They would just account for the output of water, which is what they're doing with methane. So you have to account for the intake of carbon and the outtake of carbon, the emission of carbon. You can't just say, oh, their emissions are X. Well, what's the intake? And Frank Mitloehner's done much, much, much work on this. He calls it a flow gas. Methane is a flow gas from when it's from cows. The problem with methane is when it's from the earth, when it comes from the earth, and it's, like in fracking and things like that, and from oil refining. And then it goes, there's no intake of methane, there's only an output of methane. So we dig it from the soil and let it go into the air, and then that's when it causes warming. But when it's in a cycle of eating grass, the methane comes back down, the CO2 comes back down into the grass to make grass, and then cows eat it, and then they output methane. But it's in a cycle. It's a flow gas. There is no warming from it. There just couldn't be, because it's a cycle.
Yeah, but don't you know, Kerri, by eating meat, you're contributing to so much of, you're responsible for the polar bears having to swim more.
Yeah, there's some. One of the things that's interesting in history is that they like to omit the entire medieval warm period. And there was, during the Vikings, when the Vikings were on there exploring basically much of the world, they were in the warmest time we've ever been in, including today. There were no icebergs, no ice flows. The polar bears should have died off then, but why didn't they die off then? I don't know.
They mated with they mated with the grizzly bears.
They must have something saved them. I don't know what it was, but they should have all died off. It was so hot.
They're actually doing that now too. Now that there's been an increase in polar grizzlies.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I don't want to run across one. Whew.
Oh yeah, I mean, because both polar bears and grizzly bears are both well known for their tempers.
Very much so.
So
yeah, I would not want to run across one of those, and I wouldn't want to run across any of those polar bears, grizzlies, or a hybrid.
Yeah, hybrid of them both. Although, so yeah, I think it is something that vegans like to talk about that a lot, and they say, well, don't you know that all the grass that these animals are consuming, it's hurting the wildlife?
Yeah, I don't even know what they mean by that. I guess they mean the deforestation for cattle ranching, and that does happen. There is, some deforestation, and there has been in the past, but generally, you don't need to deforest for cows. We're actually planting trees where I live because it provides shade for the cows. It's called silvopasture, and you can get multiple types of products from the same land. So you can graze cows and, for instance, raise fruit, and you get shade from the fruit. You get the fruit that falls, the animals will eat, and it's just a symbiotic relationship, and there's no reason that cows need to be on deforested land. And if you go through where cows actually live and graze, there's usually a lot of trees there. It's not deforested. Sometimes it is, but there's no reason it needs to be.
But
it's better for the animals to be forested.
But Kerri, don't you know that humans are primates, and all the other primates, they don't eat meat. They just they just eat leaves.
Most primates actually do eat meat, which kind of destroys their argument. They don't eat a lot of meat, but they do eat meat. Jane Goodall considers chimpanzees omnivores. But there are, last I checked, we actually evolved from them and diverged from them. So there's no reason to believe that we should eat what they eat when we're not them, and we evolved not to be them. I mean, we aren't them. Why would we expect to do and eat what they do and eat when we aren't them, and we evolved not to be them. Specifically, we evolved not to be them. So why would we be them?
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing is like they don't take into consideration the fact that even like a reason why some of these primates they don't have a high um, meat intake is not because they don't want to. It's just because many of them they're very lazy and sedentary, and they don't really like going out to hunt.
Yeah, they're
Now,
just not good hunters. If they were better hunters, they'd eat more. There is I think it's a macaque in uh, where they grow where they have palm forests, and it's been found to be a voracious predator of rats, and it just chows them down. And they found that they were, because the monkeys also like the palm fruit, they were going to be killing the monkeys, and they did a cost basis on this of them eating the rats, and they eat so many rats that it's very cost effective for them to leave the monkeys there and let them eat the rats.
mm-hmm.
Let them have their palm treats once in a while, their little palm fruits, as a reward for eating the rats.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that they a lot of times they'll go after like small vermins together, and even then they'll eat insects all the time, in which I hear many vegans are against, eating bugs as well, although they're trying to get people into eating them, sort of paradoxically as well.
Right. It seems like they're principally against, eating bugs, but not so much. Like they say that they are, but they're happy to kill them, just like most animals.
Mhm.
They're not. It's kind of weird to be principally against eating something, but not be principally against killing them, which is kind of the vegan problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know with I know, well, I mean, what's funny is like many people in Western cultures they sort of just don't get the whole eating bugs thing, and I mean, for I mean, like in many places, like in Mexico, they eat grasshoppers there all the time.
Asia, Asia eats a lot of insects.
Yeah, and I mean, I've told people like anything, if you can barbecue it and and put some put some
Put some
sauce
hot
on,
sauce.
there'll be people that eat it.
Pretty much, basically any animal, as long as it's. I mean, there's very few animals that are poisonous, and you can
Yeah,
pretty much eat almost every animal there is, and somebody
yeah,
will eat it if they can.
yeah, and even the ones that are poisonous, we'll figure out a way to make poisonous more just so we can eat them.
Like fugu.
Yeah, yeah. That's just like if it's in principle edible, there's at least one human that's gonna try to eat it.
Pretty much. Try that with plants. It doesn't work out super well.
Yeah.
Most
Uh,
animals you can get away with that, but people aren't out there, randomly eating mushrooms just to see what happens. So it's not gonna do you very well. But most animal you see, almost any animal you see out there, you can eat it. It's not gonna hurt you. Very few, mostly reef fish for whatever reason. That's why fugu fugu blowfish is a problem. But
mhm.
almost every other animal you can eat. There's like some beetle that is toxic, and there's a bird that eats that beetle, and that bird is toxic from eating the beetle. And otherwise, I don't know of very many animals that have any level of toxicity whatsoever.
Yeah, and I mean, like there are plenty of animals that I mean, there are plenty of bugs that people in other cultures eat. Like I said, grasshoppers is one. I think even in some parts in America they eat grasshoppers. I can't remember what they call them, but I know they do it. Um,
Locusts.
yeah, locusts, grasshoppers. Trying to think of another one that it's common. I believe. Oh yeah, I know some ants they do it as well, where they'll they'll get a bunch of ants and they'll put them like on celeries and stuff,
Hmm.
and they can just fry that a bit. And in some people they do that sort of thing. So
I am not so versed on insect eating culture. Although I have tried termites. Termites are very minty. They taste like toothpaste.
well, I remember when I used to be just I didn't want to try anything like new. Like my brother-in-law, he is a fisher. He likes to fish, and a thing that he's really good at catching for some reason is sharks.
Mm-hmm.
And he's caught multiple sharks before, and I refused to eat it. And then I eventually just caved in and tried it once. It tasted pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it just really like. Have you ever gotten like fish fillet at the when at a grocery store?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much what they taste like.
Mm.
They sort of have like a
I
yeah. It's sort of like a cross between chicken and fish.
remember having shark as a kid. We used to eat it on a semi-regular basis for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. I think it was just available and cheap, and my mom would see it at the grocery store and cook it up. And I remember it being very firm.
Yeah. And what's I mean, you would think from being in Florida, I would have tried gator before, but I haven't. Um, in Florida, gators are our love. We absolutely adore gators here.
Including eating them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like gators are to Floridians what dogs are to pretty much everyone. They're like our pets. Um,
I have had gator, but I don't remember it very much.
I've heard it tastes like turkey.
I don't remember, and I think it was deep fried, so it's hard to know what it really tastes like when something's deep fried.
Well, yeah, just uh, I've never tried it. I mean, I would try like a gator burger because I pretty much have an obsession with eating anything that's on a burger. Um, I'm a thing that I would always. I mean, what's funny is that people would say, "What would a human taste like?" And I'm like, "Well, you can just try monkeys or gorillas, and they pretty much have the same
Oh,
taste." I would imagine.
probably true.
I mean, it's just primates. Um, although what's funny is like people don't really hunt them for their for their meat. They hunt them for their fur.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, people like that are for their teeth. They like their teeth as well.
That kind of makes more sense.
They like wearing their teeth as necklaces and stuff like that, making jewelry out of it. It's sort of like with sharks.
But oh yeah. I didn't know that that was a thing, but that would kind of make more sense than using them for meat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, whenever I hear about people, I mean, it's actually against the law in many places to hunt chimps and other primates because they're endangered species.
Yeah, of course.
Mhm. Well,
That's one of the main reasons why humans don't eat most things is just because they're endangered. Like vegans think that it's a contradiction that we eat. We don't drink rhino milk or don't eat rhinos, but we eat, you know, cows. It's like, well, rhinos just aren't that available. We'd like to keep them around to hunt them in the future, in case
yeah.
of an emergency.
Well, whenever people say that there's a common thing that people say is that you can't run away from your problems. And I say,
Hmm.
if that problem is an angry moose, then yes, run away from that.
Well, that's true. and then make it into a burger.
Yeah, yeah. Whoever said you can't run away from you shouldn't run away from your problems has never had an angry moose as a problem.
That's very true.
Although, don't try to run away from a gorilla. They take that as a challenge.
I would hope to never get in that situation. That could be a very big problem. Or
Yeah.
a moose, or a rhino, or any of those things.
Well,
Just wouldn't want to.
if you want to beat a gorilla, you have to jump into water.
Well, that's good to know. I would have never thought to have that information on hand in case of that information.
They're not good swimmers.
That's good to know.
They don't like swimming at all. I think that's actually why humans sort of have done better than them, because humans are much better swimmers.
Yeah, well, that was one of the reasons why we supposedly evolved, was that we started going into the water to get um, mussels and shellfish and things like that, and that helped to grow our brain with the DHA.
Well, that, and it reduced the like our it reduced like our twitch muscle fibers, which is why gorillas and stuff are stronger than us technically. They're stronger than us, but we're, we're more leaner than them because we swam and we didn't need all that muscle.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
there's a lot of interesting theories on why and how we diverged, and one of them is the aquatic ape theory. If you've ever looked into that, it's pretty fun to look into the details of that.
um, another common thing that I've also been hearing about is when it comes from the vegan community, when it comes to matters of, trying to think. Oh yeah, when it comes to wildlife fires, they say that these big factories, they they take up so much resources and they cause fires because there's so much electricity working around it.
I don't know anything about that. I know that they seem to think that if you rewild areas, that'll help with wildfires, but actually, studies show the exact opposite. That cows help out areas to keep fire danger down. I'm in a very high fire danger area, and we pretty much have to have cows, some sort of grazer to keep the brush down, because the government doesn't do that for us. So we either have to, use manual labor and cut down brush that's going to catch on fire, or we need to have ruminants to keep that brush down. And we have goats here. We keep goats to keep the brush down and keep the poison oak down, which is a big deal out here. And we
People,
ha- we have to have it.
yeah, people should heed the warning of the wise philosopher Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires.
That is true around here with ruminants, with grazers. It's
Mhm,
definitely the way to do it.
mhm.
Um, and you said you'd love to turn anything into a burger. Well, if you're ever out in California, you should go to Sacramento and go to the Flaming Grill.
Mhm.
And they have different wild game that they make into burgers, and they have all sorts of stuff. They have python and wild boar and venison and elk and most things that you can get wild, many different animals, and their menu changes daily. It's a great burger place. I used to
No,
live in Sacramento, and I'd go there pretty regularly.
no one goes to California anymore. People go out of California.
That's true. There's quite the exodus.
Yeah. Mm. So yeah. So no one goes to California anymore. People either avoid California or they're running away from it in order to go to Texas.
If our farm wasn't here, we wouldn't be here. But man, they make it hard to have a farm here for sure. It's the right rules and regulations and laws, and just make it extraordinarily challenging. And they're pretty much taking away everybody's water here right now. We're lucky we still have irrigation water, but that may not be in the future. They're literally just taking everyone's water rights away. I'm not quite sure how that's legal here, but they managed to do it.
Well, it's not so much that they're taking away your water, it's more that they're getting the water from Flint, Michigan. Which means you're not getting water.
Not actual water.
Oh yeah, and speaking of also environment and the business in business cycles, apparently there has been controversy with artificial meats.
Mm-hmm.
And vegans are always saying that these artificial meats are the thing of the future. They'll help the environment a lot more. What's your take on that?
Yeah, there's just no real evidence of that. In fact, they've been criticized for not being transparent in their GHG, their greenhouse gas emissions life cycle analyses. And so we don't really know, but it seems unlikely that they're better than beef when basically they have to just, like I said, ignore that there's an intake of carbonaceous material into cows in order to get the emissions of their output. So if you're only counting the output, sure, maybe they're better, but there's an input side that they're just not counting. So the accounting is just completely wrong. So until we start doing proper accounting and treat methane from cows as a flow gas, the flow gas that it is, then there's no real evidence of that. And the companies aren't even being transparent. They're building entire laboratories to grow this stuff, to grow, for instance, leg hemoglobin, which is an ingredient in Beyond Burgers that makes it bloody. And so I just don't see how creating new laboratories filled with stainless steel vats is going to improve the environment. But hey, that's what vegans think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what's pretty funny about it is that they're pretty much trying to make these burgers as almost as close to the real thing as possible, which you would think that's a pretty odd if you're a vegan, where so you're trying to mimic the thing that you hate.
Yeah. And they will tell you, oh, it's just disgusting. Meat is just disgusting. Oh, well, here, have fake meat. Like, why would you have fake something that you think is disgusting? I'm not really sure, but
Uh, well, I mean, they they like their food match. They like the food that they eat to match their personality.
fake.
They say you are what you eat.
Fake. Fake news.
Yeah, and I actually didn't know that about how they're not being honest with their own greenhouse emission sort of thing. Which I would believe it would be. It is reasonable to think that they would be producing a significant amount because you're obviously going to be making these things in a factory.
Right. And
And
they're and often they're bringing these things in, they'll grow wheat in Canada and taking all these different components and bringing them into one place to make those components into one processed food, and then they'll send those components to another factory elsewhere to make it into another component. And so it's all these components are getting grown and or created in completely different parts of the world and then shipped to another part of the world and shipped to another part of the world. So are they counting all of that? That they don't seem to be doing that in these life cycle analyses.
Yeah, and I think that is true, that they don't really take into consideration just how much would go into just goes into keeping a factory afloat, and let alone the products that they're actually making would also create some exhaust.
Yeah.
But don't you know that this will reduce animal suffering? And aren't you just the kind of person that says animals should suffer?
Yeah, animals are going to suffer no matter what we do. So, and that's not a fallacy of saying, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. Sure, there's something we can do, but I don't think that that's veganism. I mean, they just aren't aware of how their food is produced, and crop deaths are an enormous amount of deaths. I mean, almost uncountable. Some of the one of the numbers that I ended up finding online was the number for when they use pesticides on fava beans. And it was something like, just in the US, I extrapolated it out from, there's X amount of aphids killed on a fava bean plant when they do pesticides, and I extrapolated it out to the entire United States crop, the amount of crops that we have, and the number of just aphids killed just in fava beans, which is kind of a minor crop in the U.S. You almost never see anybody growing fava beans in the United States. It was something like 490 trillion animals would have been killed every year in crops just for fava beans. So uh, there's a lot of suffering going on in anything that we eat. We're not going to get away from that. It's just how life is. We can't live without something else dying. And vegans want to pretend that they can, but they are just ignoring reality in this situation.
But don't, yeah, but so basically they're saying that their salad that they got was cruelty free, even though they don't have any idea about how rabbits and rats were killed in order to get that salad.
Yep. I would Vegans need to grow their own food, and they will be shocked at how much death needs to be there for them to eat their food. And a lot of them will say, "Oh, well, I just wouldn't kill anything." But yeah, you just go to the grocery store and buy the food that the farmers did kill stuff for. So, we have so many gophers in our garden. It's just incredible. We can't put anything in the ground. Everything that we're growing has to be above ground, or else the gophers will just eat it. I planted garlic the last 2 years, and they just annihilated all the garlic. So next year, if I plant garlic, I'm going to have to put it in an above ground, a raised bed with specific gopher um, proof. You have to put gopher proof galvanized uh, like netting down in order to keep the gophers out of your raised beds. It's crazy. My mother-in-law just spent what was probably $1,000, maybe 1,000 or $1,500 for 3 raised beds with gopher-proof netting underneath, and it'll probably get her, $20 worth of beans is what she's growing. She's growing string beans or green beans, and she can't be. It couldn't possibly pay for itself ever in her entire life.
Yeah, sometimes I think about growing growing like tomatoes or something, because it would be interesting to know how like actual organic tomatoes taste like,
Mm-hmm.
rather than the whole chemically processed sort of.
Mm-hmm.
What I actually found out relatively recently was about how the bananas that we eat today are actually different than the ones that like our grandparents would have eaten,
Mm-hmm.
because originally Like we have the kind of bananas that we eat are called the cavad. I think it's
Ca-
called like Cavendish.
Cavendish.
Yeah,
Cavendish.
Cavendish. And the ones that let's say our grandparents ate and were called like the Big Mikes.
Right. Gros Michel.
Yeah. And the reason why the the Gros Michels we don't really eat those anymore is because of like the thing called the Panama disease.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
The
which
fungus.
yeah, it's a fungus and it's actually spreading now to the Cavendish. And we might in the future have to get another banana thing to eat.
Yeah, they're desperately trying, but the um, big problem with that, they would do it just right now overnight if they could. But the problem is that the banana industry is so finely tuned that everything has to be perfectly designed to uh, fit the size of the banana and how and when they ripen and things like that. And so everything is designed to fit exactly the Cavendish banana, and that's why the Gros Michel they were just super lucky to find the Cavendish because it fit all of their equipment. Otherwise, if they find a new banana that isn't exactly that same size and ripens at exactly the same time as the Cavendish and can't be, kept in refrigerated containers for X amount of time, same as Cavendish, then they have to change everything around and retool the entire industry. The entire industry is based on absolute clones. And so it becomes a real problem. Their entire industry just gets decimated with if the banana gets decimated, they can't just change to, fingerling bananas, the pretty red ones that you see in the stores. Sometimes it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, would be. I, I think there is some good work going on with trying to find a cure to the Panama disease. There still is currently no cure for it,
Right.
but I think I have heard that there is some work going into it, and there has like I've seen limited successes. That's all that's been there is sort of limited success. I would like it because it would be nice if they did manage to find a cure for it, because then we could probably have Grove Michelle's back.
Maybe, yeah. Have a
I know
different
it's
flavor.
yeah. I know some places in California actually still sell Grove Michelle's, but it'd be small time farmers that are doing it.
Oh, I've never seen one.
Mhm. I know small timey farmers sometimes grow them.
Yeah, I wouldn't be
They're,
surprised because it's just a matter of having ones that are immune to that or that your land just hasn't had that fungus on it. So it's
yeah,
certainly possible.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, I would imagine they're expensive because they're a rare commodity.
Hmm. And just anything small grown in small batches is generally more expensive than something grown on an industrial level where they can bring the cost down.
Yeah, and I remember I can get like a banana at the current store for like 25 cents.
Hmm.
And well, now it's 29 cents. Thanks, Biden.
All that child labor keeps
Yeah.
keeps the costs down.
Well,
Bananas are well known for their having to use child labor.
yeah. Well, I mean, I always do find it funny how we will go back in ancient times and in American history where we'll say, well, look, these people were bad. They used slave labor to get to better themselves. And I'm saying you're saying that on Twitter on a phone that was likely produced and manufactured by slave labor in another country.
Yep, quite the
So,
contradiction.
yeah, so I mean, at least back then they were all open about it. They said, "Yep, this is slave labor." Now we say, "Well, we don't take part in slave labor. We just
Right.
we just use other people's slave labor for our own benefit.
Right. We just don't have to know about it. As long as
Yeah,
we don't know about it, it didn't happen.
yeah. Well, actually, technically, slave labor is actually still a thing in America because the constitutional amendment against it still allows for slavery in prisons.
Oh, that's interesting. I could see
Yeah,
that.
it's a prison loophole.
Well, there's probably a lot of slave labor going on in plant agriculture anyway. I mean, so many immigrants come over, and the labor standards are so low
Mhm.
that a lot of workers, a lot of companies will take advantage of that and basically treat them as slaves and never give them their pay and take away their passports if they have one. And most of them are illegal, so it ends up being essentially slave labor.
Well, what's the most ironic thing that I heard about?
What's
It's
that?
it's that that part, like, a boss was actually caught using immigrants in order to help build a border wall.
That is pretty ironic, especially if they were illegal immigrants. If they were legal immigrants, I don't know that that's too big
That's
of a
what I mean, illegal
contradiction, but
immigrants. They were like he was tasked with helping build a border wall,
that's
and
funny.
he he was caught actually hiring and having aboard illegal immigrants to help build it. And I'm like, so you're literally hiring the people you're trying to keep out.
That is pretty ironic.
You mean you don't think that they might have some sort of vested interest in making sure this wall doesn't work?
Then they can tell their family where to breach the wall.
Yeah. Um, and I always made a joke about it. I said, why are we always talking about walls? Why not we talk about a roof? I imagine a roof would be harder to build, though.
I don't know that it would keep anybody out. It would just keep them from getting rained on while they were trying to get out.
Yeah, or it would make, or well, they wouldn't be able to go over the wall anymore.
Well, might be true if you had the roof low enough to the wall.
Yes, so they would have to walk across the roof in order to get off board.
It'd just keep the sun off of them while they were trying to get over the wall or through the wall.
And I made a joke with some of my friends. I said, why did Trump hate China? And they said, why? And I said, because they have a wall and he doesn't.
I hear Biden's trying to build the wall, finish the wall that Trump started. So
Yeah, and Mexico is actually going to help pay for it.
to keep the Americans out.
Yeah, because apparently they realize that some Americans are coming over into Mexico in order to take advantage of some, like, program that they have there. And so they're going to actually be helping America to build the wall.
That that is pretty ironic.
Yeah, I mean, um, seriously. I mean, what's funny is, like, the immigrants, they always tend to go to more red states than blue states.
Yes.
Um, well, I mean, because no one's going to go to California. The the Mexicans would go to California. They say, "Well, wait, we thought we left Mexico already."
We do have a high immigrant population here, for sure.
Yeah. Well, they say, "Hey, this place reminds us of our home." They have you guys have a cartel running you as well.
We do have a cartel, that is for sure.
Well, people don't realize that the war on drugs is really just a giant money laundering scheme.
The government was letting in the cartels that were their friends. They were letting them come in from Mexico through tunnels underneath the border to bring in drugs into California.
Here in Florida, our big thing is cocaine, especially in Miami. We'll get like immigrants from Cuba that'll come and smuggle in cocaine.
Mm.
That's our big thing. Well, that and fentanyl. That's another big thing that's really on the rise here.
I have to say I don't even know. I'm so like removed from that world that I couldn't even tell you. I know meth is a big thing with the homeless population.
Well, yeah, especially the homeless white population. Well, whenever people say that drug culture has had no benefits on society, I said, can you ever think of something that can get both white trash white people and ghetto black people together?
Drugs.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Basically, what happens is the black people the black ghetto people they make the meth to sell to the white trash, and the white trash get the cocaine to give to the ghettos. It's a working relationship.
I'm just so far removed from that. I don't even know anything about that world. I used to work in emergency rooms and be have some idea around that, especially in San Francisco, but I'm so far removed from it. Other than that, I don't. Crack was the deal in San Francisco. Boy, they'd get what they called care not cash, and it was the government giving them government benefits that were supposed to be used. They were supposed to get care that they could, get food and shelter and things like that, and not get cash. Well, the care not cash basically gave them cash, and they bought drugs.
Yeah. Um. So speaking of crack, you heard about monkeypox, right?
Yeah, I don't know much about it though. I haven't followed the news on that.
Yeah. It's probably going to be hitting California especially bad. Um.
Well, I will have to follow the news on that, but I haven't been. It seems like it's another COVID scare, essentially.
Well, it travels by gay nightclubs.
There was a guy on Twitter that made a spelling error. He meant to say that it's mainly transmitted by gay men, by men sleeping with men, and he said by men sleeping with me. So
Yeah,
he got shit for that and had to take it down and issue an apology and explanation. No, it's not men sleeping with me. It's
I
supposed
mean
to
it.
be men sleeping with men.
Well, I mean it could be. He might have just told on himself.
It makes you wonder if that was a Freudian slip or not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know why we're so scared of monkeypox for. We're not monkeys. We're apes.
Yeah.
Great
I
ape.
don't know. I don't know. I just haven't been following it, so I just don't know much about it.
Well, I asked because I know vegans are very much also in that sort of sphere where they'll be asking, well, if we didn't have such horrible treatments towards animals, we wouldn't be having these diseases like this.
Exactly, yeah. Any excuse to have a red herring
Mhm,
that they can bring up veganism as the topic and make it all about meat.
mhm.
It's kind of silly. Well, it was lovely talking to you, but I've got to start my evening chores and get the geese to bed and see if I have any more baby chicks born and see if I have any piglets out there.
All right. So, can you tell the audience where they can find you?
You can find me at Carnivore is Vegan. That's Carnivore is Vegan on Instagram, Carnivore is Vegan on Twitter, and carnivoreisvegan.com on the net.
All right. You still don't have a YouTube channel, I take it, right?
I do, but I have not been active at all. I just haven't had time with the farm goings on. It's been crazy, crazy here.
If you ever do, you should translate your Instagram post onto it.
That'd be fun. Yeah, I should. Some of them would definitely work, especially for shorts.
Mhm. All right. Well, that is all for today. Thank you, Kerri, for coming on.
Well, thanks again, Mr. Brass. It's nice
Mhm.
chatting with you.
All right. And that is all for today. This is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.
Bye, everybody.